So I'll do a quick introduction, if that's okay. The presentation, our keynote speakers are Chad Goding and Anton Niemann. I think I said that right, hope I did. Building a security-first identity program. Chad is identity access and data protection consultant. Chad is seasoned identity and security professional with over 15 years experience. He's an engineer, consultant, and leader. He specializes in helping organizations prepare for and execute bleeding-edge identity technologies and strategies. His most recent role before joining Optus was as a technology lead for customer and external identities with Sherwin-Williams Company. Chad currently resides in Milwaukee with stops in Washington and Chicago. Anton, Senior Solutions Engineer at SailPoint. Anton is a seasoned identity and security professional with over 40 years experience as an engineer. He enjoys helping keep clients out of the headlines with the best cybersecurity solutions in the world. He is passionate about helping organizations solve complex security problems in today's ever-changing security landscape. Please welcome them with a warm round of applause.
All right, so we're going to run through a couple of slides here, but really we want this to be interactive, questions, Q&A type of thing. And so let me ask the question. How many of you have actually heard of SailPoint at some point? All right, that's a pretty good number of you. For those that haven't, SailPoint does not make boats or sailboats, contrary to what the name might say. But we are actually an identity security company. And so when we look at the market today, there's a couple trends that you guys have probably noticed over the last few years. One of those things is around this concept of people working from literally anywhere and everywhere. Anywhere from the beach to the mountains to random islands on the other side of the world. That seems to be the trend. And for all of us that are in security, there's no surprise that is a bit of a challenge for us. And virtually overnight during COVID, we were all sent home. Whether you previously worked from home or not, you were sent home with a laptop and maybe a VPN client of some sort to start working. And it got so extreme so quickly that we had people like my wife, who's a physical therapist at one of the major health systems in Charlotte, that was sent home to do physical therapy virtually from home. And for those of you that know anything about physical therapy, it's kind of like personal training, but trying to help people heal after surgery and things like that. So, it's kind of interesting watching her in the other room, like doing weird things with her arms and her hands, trying to help somebody figure out how to recover their new hip. But the real challenge with that is she was sent home. Previously, her laptop was only able to reach out to Epic for her medical record system, and there are various other health-related systems by being in the office and working through a network, through a private network. And so her system, more or less overnight, had to figure out how to enable a whole, thousands of folks to work from home and provide care from home. And so, as you can imagine, there's some security concerns with that. And I can almost guarantee you that they were not secure. For obvious reasons. And they didn't have time to be secure. So that's one, people working from anywhere. The second one was, the IT landscape has already been moving towards the cloud. And here pretty soon, if we're not there already, there's going to be more workloads in the cloud as opposed to on-prem in the firewall. And many could say that COVID just sped up that process. And so now we have accounts and applications that are running on SaaS solutions. We've got accounts and applications that are hosted up in AWS, GCP, or Azure. And so being able to manage that access wherever it is quite honestly almost impossible. And then, lastly is the cyber threats that the cyber threats are not new. We've seen these for years. They're only getting more complex. They're only getting more sophisticated. We're seeing wild things like phishing attacks where somebody gives out their username and password through a phishing email. And then that person, that rogue threat actor, gets access to the internal intranet. And then they go to SharePoint and they're looking at password syntax documents. And then they're using some sort of like John the Ripper to try to guess a password using the syntax. I mean, it's getting wild. And all the while, you still have regulations that are constantly ever increasing. And so trying to keep up with all of that and juggle all of that is next to impossible, considering the fact that you still have to make sure that you don't have a breach, you don't have a cyber incident that could ruin your brand. You want to chime in?
Yeah, Chris gave the story about his wife. My daughter just moved back home. She was in Phoenix and she moved back home to start a new job. And they don't have an identity program, it looks to me. Because if I've listened to her over the phone for the last 3 weeks, how she's been fighting with a help desk just to get access to one directory to get into something, sitting on the phone for 45 minutes just to get somebody to answer. That's not even getting to the person to actually do the work. Those are the types of things that you want to take away from your help desk, let them do decent stuff, not trying to give people the accesses that they need, going down the line.
So let me ask you all this. How many of you work for a publicly traded company? Just raise a hand. Okay, so maybe half of you. How many of you, publicly traded or otherwise, have some sort of access certification review that you have to do at least once or more per year? Okay. And how many of you are using a spreadsheet for any part of that access review? A handful? There may be some that aren't admitting it. The security's hard. Access certifications and being compliant is maybe harder. I don't know. So all of this is just creates a whole lot of pain and effort and man hours that is almost impossible to truly be effective. And we know that it's not effective because 84% of companies have had some sort of cyber breach or incident over the last 3 years. And so, that's where we have to rely on things like AI and automation to give us a leg up because we can't keep up. You would literally need to throw tens of people at this problem to try to get a handle on truly managing identity security in any kind of effective way. You want to take this?
So where do we start? Anybody have an idea? Where does a person really start with this initiative? Seeing that identities are at the forefront of cyber crimes, because I think most of the ones that you read in the papers is somebody's credentials were somehow gotten hold of and used to get into the systems. I remember watching about 3 years ago the 11 o'clock news in Charlotte with a reporter walking around asking people if they would sell their work user ID and password to him, and people would do it for as little as $250. Now, that scares the whoopsies out of me. If somebody's prepared to do that on the street with somebody with a microphone, imagine what they would do away from the microphone. So, that is something that we really got to think about is, do you trust anybody? And I think the answer is, after talking to Neil there, is no. You can't trust anybody, no matter how well you know them. In today's world, nobody can be trusted, and that's where the zero trust thing comes in.
So at SailPoint, our goal is to help all of you modernize your security, your identity security program. And we do that in a couple different ways. Visibility, so providing visibility into what people have what access, and controlling that access, making sure that our users have the access that they need and nothing more to do their job. When a user starts out in your organization, they should get the access that they need on day one. They should get all the access that they need on day one, and that should be an automated process. When they go to move around the organization, they should lose some access, and they probably should gain some access. And then when they go to leave the organization because they either resigned or they punched the boss in the face and they're quickly terminated, they should either lose access on the resignation date or they should lose access before they hit the parking lot. And so that's where you'll see us focus, and you'll see us wrapping AI into every one of these processes. And the goal is to help all of us make smarter decisions from an identity standpoint. So again, at the end of the day, SailPoint's mission is to truly make sure that your users have the right access at the right time and nothing more. Now, of course, we'll talk about access certifications because we all need to for compliance reasons. But at the end of the day, the real goal is to get to this concept of zero trust and minimizing the threat surface so that you don't end up in the Wall Street Journal.
I worked for a bank about 10 years ago in Charlotte, and I remember getting an email once a quarter with a spreadsheet of a couple of 100,000 lines saying, do you need the access that is here for you? I didn't know. Does anybody know which access you really need? What was my reply? Yes. And so my manager would just say, yes, he needs all that access, because I'm scared looking at that spreadsheet that I don't understand. If I say no to any of those, what is it going to do to my productivity if I lose access that I should have had? So that is something that we try and help you with as well, is to understand who's actually using the stuff that they do have access to and how you can help them clean out who doesn't need the accesses that they do have. So if you go onto our website, we just brought out this Horizons paper about identity. And there's 5 different layers of these horizons. So I need to just get my notes here. So at Horizon Level 1, this is the least advanced. The organizations really lack an identity strategy. They lack an operating model and capabilities that would need to develop a solution. Okay. At 2, the company has launched an identity management program, but it is mostly a manual process. At 3, the identity program has become digitized, scaled up, and adapted more widely across the company, identifying identity strategy as connected to the business value and impact metrics. At 4, the organization is using advanced digital tools and predictive technology. And once you get to 5, then you're really flying. So before you put up the next one, does anybody have an idea of where they think they lie in these 5 within your organization today? Who thinks they're at 1? Anybody at 2? Okay, a couple of 2s, 3s. There's a couple of 3s. Anybody at 4? Anybody at 5?
We use SailPoint, that's why.
Sorry?
We use SailPoint, that's why.
Yeah. Okay.
That'll help.
So, here's a shocking fact from the survey that was done. 45% have no real program in place. Now that is looking for disaster to happen. You're looking to get breached with that type of stuff. But look at level 5, 0%. And only, 6% at level 4. So this is out there on the web. Part of the notes that we have here at the end, there's a link in there that you can actually go and download this paper and actually go and read through it. It's about 26 pages, so I'm not going to spend the evening talking about that. But that is definitely an eye-opener for the people on the identity security side.
All right, and then the last slide before we open it up to questions. There's a link to the study that mentioned the 84% of companies have had some sort of security incident. That's that Identity Defined Security Alliance. There's an Identity at the Center podcast, which is a SailPoint podcast all around identity security. There's a link to a IGA, looks like another IGA-related leadership study. There's the Horizons report that Anton mentioned, and then you also have all of us that are in SailPoint shirts to come up and ask questions. So the one thing I would say is, for whatever reason, more recently than not, it seems like we've talked to a lot of companies that have, it's almost like the hill to climb is too high, so they feel like we don't know where to start, and they almost kind of paralyze themselves in that space. I would say if that's you, or if that's your company, come talk to us. We can set up some sessions, virtually or what have you, and we can talk through those details and a strategy to help you get on the way. This is not a big bang type of thing. This is not, you don't buy SailPoint and all of a sudden you have identity security. It's a bit of a phased approach, and there's some big rocks that you can help to progress you forward in your identity security journey. So with that, we'll go ahead and open it up to questions. So any identity-related questions?
So your chart is fine, but most large companies don't fall into one of those categories. You may have systems that are in category 1, some of that are in 5, some that are in 3, because you've got disparate systems all over with varieties of identity management. How do you address that, particularly at companies that are merged with 5 or 6 entities that have 10 different identity management systems? How do you do that? How do you manage the diversity? Some systems aren't at the same level as others.
Are you referring to identity security specifically?
Sure, or controlling identity and management into those systems.
Yeah, so obviously every company is unique, but you almost think of SailPoint as the foundation or the core. And so, you're not, let's say you merge with 5 different companies, you're likely not going to bring in all of those, you're not going to bring all of those systems and applications into SailPoint all at once. You're going to analyze each one and figure out the most impactful, and you're going to go after the, like we said, the biggest rocks first, where you can make the biggest impact in the short amount of time. You're going to connect those into SailPoint. You can almost think of SailPoint as your identity system of record. So we're going to have a record for every user within the organization, both human and non-human. And within that record, we're going to know things like name, manager, department, job title, any other attributes that are relevant to your organization. That information will be stored in SailPoint, and we'll be able to take actions based off of that, based off of those attributes, whether that's, hey, we need to certify all access for our domain admins that are, as part of Active Directory, or all the people that are based in London, things like that. So it's not a big bang approach, but the goal is to, over time, connect more and more systems into SailPoint, and once we aggregate that data or pull that data into SailPoint, like I said, we'll know all the attributes about a user, but we'll also know what accounts they have access to, what entitlements they have access to on those downstream systems. And the idea is that now you can start to effectively automate the life cycle of that user And you can also go through the certification process and things of that nature. Does that help? I mean, it's not, obviously it's pretty unique to your organization, but it's literally an exercise in sitting down and figuring out what makes sense and where do we go after first.
Yeah, I'd like to add some more color to what you just said. I'm a consultant, and I currently work for a large bank. And they deploy an average of between 50 and 100 new applications every year. And as we do, every single application needs to go through a baseline security requirements and architecture, etc. Question number 2 is, do you have SailPoint information? And then it goes to the SailPoint group. And what happens is they ask questions such as, what's the data classification? Is it GMPA, is it SOX, etc.? And then the question is, like, no. On the schedule, it's like 1 year, 1 year and a half before they get. So my question to you is, how come it takes so long to integrate any application with SailPoint? Because that's a unique application.
So the question was, why does it take so long to?
Yeah, I know it's not overnight. It's not you install it to work. So
yeah. So the question was, why does it take as long as it does to connect a downstream application into SailPoint? And to be honest, it's one of those answers we never like to hear, which is it just depends on the application. So if it's one of our out-of-the-box connectors, which we have, I think we're up to like 150 or 200 of those today, it's usually pretty quick. It's just a couple of configuration items. If it's something like an API or just a JDBC connection, depending on the complexity of the app, there could be some things that we have to work through there. It really just depends on the application. And obviously, the more custom the application, the more effort it may take to connect that in.
yeah, because part of what you do is recertification. So we have a program to recertify every student now. And the message by default is going to be, we expose it to a spreadsheet. You mentioned spreadsheet. And then we find a way to import it in SailPoint or reconcile. So we're back to doing something similar.
Yeah, and honestly, we could have a whole discussion on connecting into systems that, for whatever reason, we can't connect to. We still are looking to manage that access, even though they're disconnected systems. And we can get into those details in a one-off conversation.
I was going to ask, so how does this integrate with or replace like Microsoft Active Directory or ICE, Cisco Identity Service Manager? No, it doesn't work with or replace.
No. So I would say 99 or maybe 100% of our clients are using Active Directory, and we pull in Active Directory. In fact, it's our in terms of our connectors, it's the most full-featured connector that we have, just because of how prevalent it is in the market. So no, we're not replacing Active Directory. We're not an LDAP of any kind. We've run into customers that had it's like Red Hat Identity Manager, which is like more of like a Linux-based LDAP. We would integrate with something like that as well. So yeah, we're not. A lot of companies that we talk to are, or we're trying to use Active Directory to do role-based access, and there was a time for that, but we've gotten a little bit more complex than maybe Active Directory can manage those roles, if you want to call them that. And so we look at when we have a user and a user record, of course there'll be a lot of Active Directory groups, but there also may be Salesforce groups or Workday or whatever other downstream system. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, what about the Cisco ICE? Is that a competitor or do you work with that?
Is Cisco ICE more like is that also an LDAP of some sort, or?
Yeah, it also works with Microsoft.
Radius
It's an
token
services engine, so.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, I can look into that one, if you
It's
want
not
to.
really an identity provider,
It's managing endpoints.
access
radius.
Yeah. It's
Okay.
managing the access to endpoints.
Okay, so I don't, so more than likely, if it's not really related to identity in terms of like managing access to an application, we probably don't. But honestly, I can't, without knowing more about it, and we have a system where I can pull up and see all the different systems that we've connected to, whether we have an out-of-the-box connector or some other means, and so I can check that out.
So on your horizons chart,
Yeah.
can you talk about where, like, if you're a cloud native, like Azure P3 directory structure, like where does that put you on the horizons chart, like out of the box?
So I think what this report has done is it looked at it from an identity point of view. So whether using Azure or GCP, AWS, we don't really care what systems you're using. What we're looking at is how are you managing the users and the accesses that they have, and that is where this report came. Does that answer the question or not?
Well, not really. I mean, because Azure Active Directory P3, you know, it has advanced tools. It has privileged information management. It has analytics about user actions, you know, even down to user, you know, create a forwarding rule for their inbox to an external, you know, recipient, or user provisioned access to their account to another identity within or without of your identity. So I guess what I'm asking is, when you're looking at like an Azure E5 license, which comes with P3 or E2, or excuse me, like, yeah, E2 that comes with E2, right? Azure Active Directory license and the features that come along with that. What's the net difference between that being cloud native and what you guys are providing? Like, what more does what you're doing get me in addition to those advanced Microsoft features that are coming?
Yeah, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that Azure AD P3 that you're referring to, can you manage anything outside of Microsoft?
Yeah, there are, you know, external identity provider integrations. I mean, there's some configuration required to do that. I mean, you can't, it's not just, you know,
Yeah. So
tell your, you can't just like, you know, say, oh, well, I use, you know, this UUID on Google and magically you're integrated. I mean, there's some other things that have to be connected there in order to make all that work. But I mean, it is an actual true Active Directory implementation in Azure, right? So
yeah. So, and I've heard some rumblings
there's
of it.
Federation, OAuth, there's other things, you know, provided as.
Yeah. So the biggest difference is we're going more broad than maybe that is focused. Like I know for a fact that Microsoft, from that sense, does not have connectors to things like, you know, mainframe systems or some of these other third-party applications out of the box. So yeah, I mean, there's ways to get close to what we're doing, but not without a significant amount of customization. And that's the biggest difference with SailPoint. I mean, frankly, identity is hard. Whether it's, you know, whether you're using Active Directory or Azure AD or, you know, some of these other systems that are out there, it's not easy. And you'll see when you know, if you go hands-on with our solutions, we try to make the UI as simple as possible and put the complexity behind the scenes. So that doesn't mean that the solution, you know, is minimal or can't do a significant amount in terms of managing access. It just means we try to take the heavy lifting on us, you know, on us as SailPoint, and try to make the end user experiences as simple and straightforward as possible, and allow you to connect to as many applications and systems out of the box as possible.
So can you talk a little bit more about the mainframe aspect? Because since you brought it up, like, can you tell us a little bit more about like what you're doing with mainframe, and how far down this path are you able to take,
So
AS400, or something?
So Anton and I both have a RAC F, top secret ACF2 background, so we can get into those details, but I don't want to bore those that are not.
I mean, we can go pretty deep down into what access a user has within a mainframe system and pull that into, so when you look at identity A, you can see he's got access to Azure, he's got access to AD, he's got access to Salesforce, he's got access to RACF or whichever. So you can see all those entitlements and what that person can actually do in the system. So that is what we're trying to do, is to give you a 360 view of exactly what a user ID has access to and whether they're actually using it.
So would you consider yourself a true replacement for Oracle Identity Manager now?
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Any other questions? And again, if you have like downstream specific system questions, we can definitely take those offline, like that, the mainframe question, we can get into those details.
So in your observation, you're working at one of the identity journey, I've been inside of selling for a long time. Customers jump in, they get one assessment, and they go down one long path, spits or starts. How important is the concept of sequencing? Is there a right way to do it that you see? Are there variables like industry or different things? I mean, how important is that concept of sequencing in the identity journey?
Yeah, so identity is a journey. It is, it is a program. It's not like you plug it in and you've got identity security. And there is, in any successful project, there is a sequence plan, so to speak. Now, in terms of what that plan looks like, it really is just unique to every company and the systems that they're running. Some companies are running homegrown applications on the mainframe in CICS or things like that. Others are running something on AS400. Others are just running SaaS apps or strictly in the cloud. And so it really just depends what, on the specific use cases.
You mentioned some of the big rocks that companies need to address that, identity being a program, some of those big rocks ultimately make a big step forward. Can you talk about, like, what are some of the big rocks that you're seeing nowadays that might, when a business is looking to take on their identity program, what are some of the big rocks they can look at that are yield large ROI?
Yeah, so for our customers that are starting out their identity journey or modernizing their identity journey, it is a phased approach. So generally in that first phase, we'll see a customer connecting their HR system or their authoritative source, their system of record, their home for their users. And then they'll be connecting to usually 3 or 4 downstream systems. Might be a ServiceNow, Active Directory, Azure AD, and they may have one other critical homegrown application. And so we'll start there, and the idea is to make as much progress in as short amount of time as possible. And so we'll get after those big rocks. Again, AD in almost every company, that's one of the first, one of the items in the first phase. But when you get into some of these, we were talking to a bank that had systems that frankly don't have APIs available. Some of these are startup companies that the bank is connecting out to. There's a little bit more complexity there. And so that might be a phase 2 or 3. So, does that answer the question, Alex?
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Like, what kinds of things limit the implementations and kind of stall the implementations and kind of keep them going to phase, whatever the longer phase is, like 3 or 4,
Sure.
whatever it looks like. And what kind of roadblocks do people run into that slow that process down?
So, there's the systems that we can connect to. Of course, out-of-the-box connector or connected systems are always going to be the easiest to connect to. Then we get into systems where, maybe we're going after a table in a database, and so we're using a JDBC connection or some sort of, API. And then after that, you get into those disconnected systems. So, every once in a while you'll run across a system that's running on, or an application that's running on an AS400. It's been running for 30 years, it runs great, company's not getting off of it, they love it. But it has no external connectivity. It has no APIs available. We can't connect to it using some sort of JDBC connection. And so that's where we'll look at importing flat files. And we do have an automated process for doing that. So bringing a flat file in, sending it back to be ingested, things like that. Again, it really just depends on the system and the different options that system will have to connect to it.
I was also looking, I think there's 4 main enablers to get a proper identity program going. Strategy. I was listening today, we've actually got our worldwide conference going on in Austin this week called Navigate. And I was listening to a couple of sessions, and every single customer that got up there said, you got to have a good strategy. You need buy-in from the top down. If you don't have the buy-in from the top down, forget about getting a good identity strategy in place. So that was the one. The other one is you need technology and you need the tools. If you don't have technology and the tools, forget about it. Operation models. You have to have operation models. And the last one is talent. You have to have the talent to be able to implement these programs. I mean, anybody here that knows security ain't cheap. Putting in a security program is not a cheap solution. It costs money. So you have to be prepared to spend the money to produce the results. And identity security is just one of those. You've got to spend the money to get the results, to make sure that you secure your end users, and whatever type of identity it is, you've got to make sure that those identities are secure. Because who today, using a SaaS application, let's think about Salesforce. How do you know whether everybody in your company that has access to Salesforce is actually using what they've got access to? It's almost an impossible thing to go and look at. The same with AWS. Who has access to AWS and what can they do within AWS? Those are the types of things that we're trying to help you with, to be able to make sure that you understand it in English terms for the non-technical type people, so that they can take actions on those types of things as well.
Any other questions? I'll just highlight one thing Anton said. It's, as far as I know, it's extremely hard to actually, of course we can see what people have access to, but we can't see, in many cases, we can't see if they're actually using that access. And so with SailPoint, we do have a solution where you can say, hey, you haven't used Zoom in 6 months. You probably don't need that license. We're going to stop paying for that license. We're going to remove it, and you can go back through the process of requesting it. We can do the same thing for things like Salesforce and other SaaS-related applications. So any other questions? And feel free to come up to us afterwards, and we can definitely have more in-depth conversations based on specific use cases as well.
Would you put that kind of use access in the extended and unified identity category, or is that further down the foundational? In your opinion, should people be doing that earlier on, or is that more of a advanced feature?
So, in my opinion, if somebody's going through an access certification, historically, we're looking at an access certification maybe twice a year, and let's be honest about it. Many of our managers are rubber stamping that access and moving on, checking the box and moving on. But if I could say to that manager, this user hasn't logged into this system in 6 months, or 2 years or 5 years, you can feel a little bit more confident about making that yes or no decision on whether or not they need that access. So, obviously, every company's different, but putting that type of user or usage information into context of an access certification right from the start is probably valuable.
Just curious, how prevalent is multi-factor authentication? It seems like most companies, any large company, any company seems to be using it these days, aren't they?
It seems like the majority of the customers that we're talking to are, if you're talking to us, you're probably also either already have or are looking at a PAM solution, and you already have or are looking at an SSO solution with multi-factor authentication. So,
I'm just saying, so if that guy wants to buy my user ID and password or anyone else's, if most companies are using MFA, it's not going to do them any good.
well, and
We hope so. We hope so.
the real question is, are they using MFA on all systems or just certain systems? Because in RACF land, I can assure you they're not all using MFA, and they should be.
That's privileged systems
Yeah.
at large. Like, it is very difficult. Like, I'm also a consultant, so like, it is very difficult to do multi-factor on all of your infrastructure.
Yeah.
So you have to go touch every part of your infrastructure, and even if you're using ICE, and turn on radius authentication for those specific user profiles on every part of your infrastructure. It is not a trivial effort. It is not, so even large enterprises are not doing it well. Even medium enterprises are not doing it that way.
So back to the chart, if there's a company that you're working with that's starting at a 1 or 2, do you build them up to a 3 or 4, or do you immediately, from the ground up, try to get them to a 5?
If they have executive buy-in to, move to modernize their identity program, we're going to work with them to get closer to that 4 or 5 range. But again, to Anton's point earlier, typically you have to have that executive buy-in because it's a process. It doesn't happen overnight.
And this is not a quick fix. I was listening to one of the sessions today, one of the Fortune 50 companies that had implemented our solution, and the way they'd taken it and what they were doing actually made me sit back and think a little bit, because a majority of their time was spent planning, not implementing the solution, was planning how they were going to roll this out and how they were going to onboard all their different applications. So today, when an associate starts the day one, hour one, he has all the accesses that he needs when he walks into the store. That is amazing. And he doesn't need to go and ask for anything else. He has the accesses that he needs, and they do that all through the SailPoint solution. And that is something that the person needs to aim for. Now, they still a long, long way, as the guy said. They still years away from getting to where they want to be. But this is a journey that never ends. Identity security journey will never end. You'll never get to a point where you say, okay, we're good. We don't have to do anything. Things always change. There's always things changing in the organizations, mergers, acquisitions. That's going to change up everything. So this is an ongoing, not a project. It's an ongoing solution that you need to plan for the rest of your life, is identity security.
You need the right integrator to help you get there.
Yeah, you need the right integrator. Actually, that was one of the main things that this customer said today, was they said, you got to make sure you have the right integrator working with you to be able to achieve the results that you want. Because if you don't have somebody good working with you, forget about it.
So do you guys strongly recommend or require professional services as part of your initial sales and engagement in order to get this thing to the point where it's like a minimum viable product for that customer?
Yeah, so professional services definitely get involved right in the beginning. And we have different phases depending on where you want to get. But phase 1 will get, let's say, your most important 3, 4, 5, 6 applications up and running within a very short period of time. I think this customer actually said they got their major applications up and running within 6 months. And they converted from some legacy program. They never mentioned what it was. They never mentioned who the integrator was. But they say if it wasn't for the integrator and what we bring to the table, they would never have been able to do it in 6 months.
Is part of what your offering does, I mean, obviously you're a product company, but the first step in that journey is an assessment to figure out, am I a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5? Is that something the integrators or professional services companies do, and how do you?
So there's actually, if you go look at the website and you actually look at this, you can actually ask for an assessment. And we will actually sit down with you and go through this with you and determine where you are in your process.
So when you're thinking about that, you named like the 5 things, like the strategy, the buy-in, the technology, all of that kind of stuff. Is it truly that top-down approach, or what you guys seeing, like is there some grassroots effort that is successful where people start with maybe like a demo of this and customers, or is this the type of thing where it really has to be that top-down approach with the strategy first and the buy-in, because it's going to be so pervasive, it's just going to transform the way the entire business stack works, where they really have to start from that end instead of the grassroots end?
Yeah, so of course, you can always start the process at the grassroots level, but identity, if it's done right, it's hitting every aspect of the business. And sometimes there's a bit of a process change. Some things get easier for some people, and some people may not want to do access certifications that didn't previously do them. So yeah, of course you can kick the tires and do some things at that lower level, but to really have a successful project and program, you need somebody at the top that says, yep, we need this, and can kind of spread that message throughout from maybe more from a political standpoint than anything.
Sorry, follow-up question. So
Sure.
you have a questionnaire that tells you whether I'm 1 through 5,
Yeah.
right? And is part of what you offer as well like a kind of a roadmap that says, hey, you have 100 apps, do it in this sequence. These are the higher risk things to focus on first. Like, how much of that do you guys do, or is that something? I own a professional services company, so I'm curious where the line is between a PS partner working with you on that and you guys doing it for your clients.
So at SailPoint, we call ourselves a partner-first organization. So a lot of the assessments and deals that we do are hand-in-hand with a partner. So, in that specific situation, if you have that relationship, then you'll lead and we'll be there to help you along the way. Any other questions?
Can you talk a little bit about identity in the IoT world, and like what you guys are doing around IoT and maybe like SCADA, like, specifically, or is that kind of beyond the scope of like what you're really addressing today?
I would say that's a bit on the fringe. Not saying we won't do it or can't do it, but it's a bit on the fringe. Any other questions?
What type of boats do y'all make again?
Well, sailboats. Nice ones.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.